So we're here today with Cole Berschback. She is from the totalpotential.com or the Total Potential. She's at the Total Potential at all of her like handily things. So if you want to go find her, she's the Total Potential. And Cole, what brings you here today?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm just excited to be able to have a conversation and yeah, share whatever arises, whatever the universe decides to deliver today.
I love that. That's where I live. I live in that.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So what does the Total Potential do?
So there's a long backstory, but what we do is we support families really who have decided that maybe there's a different, better, more authentic way to do family life and do it in a connected way. And so, in terms of the work that I personally do, it's mostly through one-on-one coaching and moms groups and those types of things to really just support the evolution of getting to show up in a new way and see our families through a different light. But I'm super aware that families have a lot of needs and a lot of different types of needs that I'm not an expert in all of those. So we have a lot of resources from, teachers, occupational therapists, marriage and family counselors, like all different kinds of people to really, just shed some light on what other opportunities might be. If you want to just do family life in a way that feels really true and maybe outside of the box of what is considered quote unquote normal or standard. And just do it in a way that feels authentic. So that's the total potential.
Yeah, that's the word that popped in my head the whole time when you were talking was the word authentic. Like, right? Like showing up who you are. Here I'm gonna do a small plug for myself. I'm doing a book club starting in January, and the book we're starting with is Daring Greatly, right?
Mhm.
Which is all about like being vulnerable and authentic, especially in the family, but also in the world, and showing up for each other for who you really are. And as a family, like there's a lot of that doesn't happen where you show up authentically is not necessarily the norm inside of families.
Yeah. Well, and you think about family life, like these people that live in your home, um, are the same people that, yes, you love, like, wow, your mind can hardly even wrap its, self around the amount of love and connection and all those things. And those are the same people that are going to trigger you into the least favorite patterns that you have, right? And so just to be honest with ourselves that like everything that we might need to develop and really be the most of who we are, you can find that in your family.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of us, we keep that at like an arm's distance because it's scary, because we don't know what's on the other side. We're not sure what to do with it once we notice it. Um, but it's like if we can just change the lens on that, that the family isn't the obstacle of getting to the very best of who you are. It's actually perhaps the vehicle for getting to the very best of who you are. I think we could really shift the way we see families, the way families are held in our culture, in our society. I mean, there's so much there. And I think we're just, scratching the surface by how kind of we're raising families, quote unquote, in the normal day-to-day life of, living in America right now. So there's just so much cool stuff that can be part of family life if you decide to see it that way.
How'd you get here? You said it's a long story on how you got here. How'd you get
Yeah.
here?
Uh, So I worked in health and wellness always. I always had a really big pull to that. Even in high school, I knew I wanted to work in that field, and I started out as a dietitian and had a unique experience working in a cystic fibrosis clinic. And the reason that was so dynamic was because they're young children with what is a very hands-on, lots of care needed, lifelong condition.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in these dynamics where I would show up in a room and there's, some conglomeration of parents, grandparents, kids present. And the places that had calm, the places that had stability, the places where you could tell the kids knew they could talk to the parent, those children were thriving in ways that maybe don't always show up in a medical chart, right? Like
Yes. Yeah, that
they're
doesn't get measured. That's not like, it's not like a
right.
lab, right? I can't just
Exactly.
run your blood and find out how well you communicate as a family, right?
Exactly.
I can't tell based on your CBC or your creatinine, right? How
Yes.
well your heart is actually doing emotionally.
Exactly. Exactly. And so this just stood out so deeply, like, wow, when a family is really functioning and functioning at a high level, this level of wellness that's available for the children is it's a totally different experience, even as a third party coming into the space,
Right.
it is in other family units. And I don't say that with judgment. I mean, it's just an observation. We're all doing the best with what we have and what we know.
I say that
Um,
all the time. You're doing the best you can with what you've been given, right? Like
exactly.
you get to every space that you're in naturally and aauthentically because you're
Yes.
doing the best you can with what you've been given at this moment. Now, I love to look back at me and judge me for
Sure.
like
Yeah,
the horrible, shitty ass, dumbass, not so kind reactions, things I did. But then on another part, I have to remember I was doing the best I could with what I had been given at that time.
absolutely. Absolutely. So this was a unique place to work and have this kind of
Mhm.
just environmental, it was always around me kind of experience. And then, I was a young mother at that time. And as soon as I started to one kid, yeah, it wasn't super obvious to me that this dynamic was quite as present. But after I had my second child, I was like, wow, there's more to this than I've, really noticed in my own home, that I've noticed in myself. And my brother also has a young family that's, similar age children. And we were in the same spot where we were like, they say to be your best, you got to be at the gym for 2 hours every day and you have to meal prep and, all these things. And I'm like, these things are like in direct opposition to being present in your family. And how could that thing that removes me like almost completely out of my family somehow is what makes me quote unquote better. And so we were having this round and round conversation. We're like, well, we can't be the only people who are, trying to navigate this and the only people who are trying to figure this out. And so we just dove in head first from there. I can't hear you all of a sudden. I'm not sure what happened.
My
Oh,
microphone.
there you go.
So I thought I heard you say you and your brother were having this
Yes.
conversation. So does that
Yes.
mean you and your brother are continuing to like figure this out together and you guys are in this together?
We have
And
been in it together. Yes.
yeah. And then where does your spouse fit in? Or does he not? I don't want to make any
He's
assumptions.
not, yeah, no, he's not part of the business. He's not part of our platform. He doesn't do coaching, those kinds of things, but he's along for the ride in his own way.
Well, yeah, because you're standing in the kitchen going, we're going to have an authentic conversation about this. And he's going, I'm going to be vulnerable now.
Yeah, yeah. And he's been, I think something that's come to us many, many times over the years is okay, so I'm interested in this, but what if my spouse is not into this at all? Or my kids are like, what on earth are you talking about? And, I think it takes a lot of courage to say, I'm cool still doing this. And you get to be exactly where you are. I'm not responsible for you. I'm not responsible for how you show up in the world. I'm going to show up in the world a certain way and practice it and show up, totally in your space. But the cool part about that is if you give another person that space, they will take it and they will have their own evolution. It will just look different than yours is, but that's the beauty of it because they don't need your evolution, they need theirs. So, yeah, I mean, my husband's an incredible person. He has worked hard to really hone himself as a person and to show up as a husband and a dad and all of those things. I'm super grateful to him, even though it's looked totally different than what my path has looked like.
Right. Well, I think that's true for all of us, right? The path to how we get to where we're going. I mean, some of us, you said that you got there because you were wandering through cystic fibrosis, right?
Mhm.
Um, where a person has the breaking and I'm going to go do something different with my life is different for all of us. right? Like that moment of when we're like, I can no longer stand in this space anymore and be who I am authentically, which is why I left teaching,
Mm.
because most of my listeners know this already, but I'm a Hodgkin's lymphoma survivor. And so when I came out of treatment, I was standing in my classroom and I had students who were like, I don't give a shit about my life and I just want to go get high. And so
Mm.
I would talk to the students who like really were struggling and like, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What would you love to do if you couldn't fail, what would you do? Right? That quote. And they were all like, I have nothing. I don't want to do anything. And I had just come out of waiting rooms with people who were desperate to live. Like that's who I was hanging out with. I was hanging out with, like, while I was in treatment, I was hanging out with people who were like, I'm doing this because I desperately want to live. And then I went back to my classroom to students who didn't give a shit about living.
Mm.
And I was like, I can't stand in this dichotomy anymore because it's just too hard for who I have become.
Yeah.
And I left teaching and got a social work degree.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. And now I'm like really tapping into the intuitive because that's social work isn't it for me either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I think permission to have those evolutions, right? I think it's very easy. So my husband is a physician. This is a great example. My
Mm,
husband is a physician. You spend 14 years becoming a doctor. I mean, you have committed so much time, so much energy just to getting to the starting line, right?
yes.
And it's so easy to feel like that's my forever. I'm never going to have a different career. I'm never, and all of that is a story. And we have to get really, really curious. Like, is my story good? Do I
Right.
like my story? Is this story
Right.
useful? Like, just to really open up that, because it's very, we grew up in a time where like my parents have worked at the same place for their whole entire
Lives.
careers.
Yeah.
For most of us, that's all we have ever known is like you pick a path, you stay the course, kind of no matter what. Like, whether you like it or not, you're going to stay that course. And I think, a blessing for our generation and the generations to come is there's less of that. There's less of a story. You get more choice, you have more freedom, and it can look a whole bunch of different ways. For some people, that's kind of scary because there's almost like too many choices, and I totally
Right.
get that. Um, but yeah, it's like I love that you've had multiple different careers. That's beautiful. Like, who knows what's next? And that's the fun part. That's the
Right.
exciting part.
Well, I had two thoughts that went through my head. I'll see if I can remember them both. One,
Yeah.
we asked 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds who don't even have like a prefrontal cortex yet to like figure out what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. And I was like, I want to be like Anne of Green Gables. I just want to like teach and like write. Like that's all I really want to do is teach and write. And that's not the story at all for me now. Not that the writing isn't in there, but writing, you know what I mean.
Yes, yes, yes.
And then the other thing is I bumped into when I was starting my mindfulness training and starting my mindfulness journey, which is really, I just own it now as a meditation journey, right? It's just a journey into meditation.
Yeah.
Um, I was at a Penn Medicine, University of Pennsylvania Medicine 8-week course. And one of the people in the course with me, there were many doctors in there with me. And one of them was a former surgeon who had a panic attack in the middle of surgery and couldn't ever get back into the operating room.
Wow.
And she was like, I don't know what to do with who I am now, with all of the years of training and all of the student loans and all of the things that I went through to get to where I am. And now I'm in this space where I don't know what I'm supposed to do because I can't get into an OR. I can't get into the theater because my body won't let me.
Yeah. And that's hard, right? To be in a spot where like you're forced
Yes.
to make a different choice.
Yeah. Like there
That's
isn't
a good
choice there in a
experience.
way. It's like a woman
Yeah.
who goes in for uh an a C-section and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we have to take all of it. We can't just like take the
Yeah.
break for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It all has to go." And then there's no choice there, right? Her choices are then removed from her.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a hard place to be. And it's, if we can give ourselves the space beforehand, I have learned this in super hard ways. I'm not saying this like as a judgment of anyone. I've been taught this lesson over and over again in my life. But, you know, life will deliver the lesson.
Oh
Like,
God, yeah.
can we get quiet soon enough, quicker, more often, so that the lesson can be delivered in a softer, more gentle way instead of literally getting hit over the head and having, something that feels essentially like catastrophic
Hmm.
happen? Because life will keep talking to you. And sometimes it takes being absolutely hit over the head to really hear what it's trying to say. And I think for a lot of people, it's scary to say, okay, well, how would I start to have the space to listen? Right? You have a mindfulness practice, you have a meditation practice, you have a breathing practice. Like you love to be out in nature. There's all these ways to get quiet and listen to what the universe, life, God, like whatever words you use for that are trying to tell you. But it sounds like you've learned a hard lesson. I've learned hard lessons. Like life will deliver the lesson,
Oh
and it's so
yeah.
much easier to catch it when it's
I
coming
would,
your
I
terms.
would rather it be a guidance, right? I would rather have it be a still small voice and an encouragement than have it be Hodgkin's lymphoma,
Yeah,
because that was the only way to get me out of my rut, to be
yeah,
honest. It was the only way I was willing to like let the scales fall off my eyes and see reality for what it really was at that time, right? That's the only way to do it. The universe knew that, and I got a big giant clunk over the head in a way that made me stare down death.
yeah.
Not so fun.
No.
Right.
Not
And I
fun.
know people who like recently are in the middle of a nasty, nasty divorce. And for the husband in that scenario, right? Like he's getting a life lesson in a way he never wanted one.
100%. Yep. Yeah.
And so it's a matter of like listening when you when you don't think you need to be listening.
Yeah. Which I would argue is like every day, all the time,
Yeah.
right? Can I listen to my own thoughts? What the hoop and happened am I even telling myself like throughout the day, let alone, the big life decisions that I'm making? It's just, yeah, it's challenging. I get it. The mind is super busy. Our lives are super busy. We're set up to be that way. And where are the spaces where you can start practicing something different? Because there's, yeah. And even, one thing I'm super into, and as a yoga instructor and Pilates teacher, and I've, had this health and wellness background, like I'm super into the body and what the body has to share. Like, even if you don't have a practice of moving your body yet, let your body be like a vehicle of rising up the information that it already knows that the brain doesn't have access to yet. So even if it's a walk, stomping around your kitchen, dancing, like whatever it is, but letting even just the body rise up information so that the brain can take a break from trying to make meaning of all the things can be super helpful.
So I have a quick story. I was working with adjudicated youth after I got my master's in social work because it was in a school, and they're like, "Oh, you know how to handle school. Let's like hire you as a therapist in a school," right? Which I find is great. Like it's probably one of my favorite jobs. But like I was working with adjudicated youth in a school for, adjudicated kids, and which is high burnout. So we had a new supervisor. She came in, she started doing like self-care Fridays. And she was like, "You're always on top of your stuff. I expect you to be at Self Care Friday. Like every one of your notes is written, Kim." And I'm like, "Yeah, every one of my notes is written because I take Friday to write all my notes. Like I take Friday to make sure I'm on top of my shit." And she's like, "Well, you're coming to yoga." And I was like, "I don't have time to be at yoga." She's like, "I'll see you there." And when you're given a directive, right? So everybody's like, "Are you going to yoga on Friday?" I'm like, "I've been given a directive. I have to be there." And then she came up to me and she's like, "I don't mean to be giving you a directive because I told enough people it got back to her."
Sure.
So I get into yoga on Friday, and she starts having us do very simple yoga things. This is not hard yoga things, right? There isn't a crow to be seen, right? There isn't it's like hold yourself in warrior pose and intentionally, which is just open, like just standing wide open, basically. It's just standing wide open. And she goes, "And I just want you to drop your breath down into your hips and breathe into your hips." And I crumpled. I like
Yeah.
wound up on the floor in this ball, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" Because
Yeah.
I was tearing for the rest of the hour. I was just like, "I'm just done. I'm just done. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to bawl my eyes out for the rest of this yoga session."
Yeah.
And then they were like, "Okay, Kim, so I guess you have to explore yoga." And I was like, "Hell to the no."
Yeah. the hips are often referred to as the storage compartment of the body. So
Exactly.
your
Any
experience is not an unusual one. I have
I
seen many people break into like full
yeah,
release in the hips.
exactly. And so I learned, that's what I learned. Like when you have emotions and you don't know how to deal with them, you shove them down. And where do they wind up? Those emotions wind up in your hips. So when you breathe into your hips, you're like stirring up the muck on the bottom of the lake, is what you're doing. And you're just making really muddy water. So your body can flush that out. Well, now it took me a long time, right? This was 2014 or 15. It's now 2023. I now have a relatively regular yoga practice. I don't want to say it's all the time, but it's at least once every 2 weeks, right? I
Yeah.
have a relatively regular yoga practice. And if I could just live in pigeon, like if I could do yin yoga and just live in pigeon, which for those of you who don't know, it's extremely uncomfortable. It's
Especially if you have tight hips.
especially if you have tight hips. Exactly. It's lying, not the supine one where you do it on your back, but the one where you're lying on your face and you have one leg bent up and under you, all crooked like, and one leg straight. And it opens up that hip that's bent in a crazy big way. And there are days where I'm like, oh, because I know even in the opening stretch, the eyes are becoming watery. I'm like, the second we get to pigeon, I am going to lose it. And my yoga instructor now just like has a tissue box ready and she brings me tissues and just leaves them next to my mat because I just weep it out.
Yeah. It's got to go somewhere. Right? It's got to move because otherwise it gets stuck and that's rough stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I'm all for opening the hips and letting in
Yes.
the air.
I love it.
So yes, you were saying getting to know the body and allowing the body to lead even and allowing your body to start showing you where you need some movement.
Movement or even like the intelligence of the body. I mean, we forget, the amount of neurons between the gut and the heart alone. It's like that's intelligence. I mean, that is
Mhm.
wisdom that lives there because it has no need to make meaning, which our brains are incredible. I'm not saying anything negative about our brain mind. Um, but its job is to make meaning. It's very, very good at that. The intelligence of the body, the intelligence of the heart, the intelligence of the gut, it has no need to make meaning. It's not designed to do that. And a lot of times, I think for some people, the confusing part about the intelligence of the system, not just the brain, but the system, is that it doesn't speak in words. Maybe there's a thought that will rise up that connects to the sense you're getting from the body. But for most of us, it will be a knowingness or an understanding. It will be like as if you could never unknow what you just found out, even though it might be so subtle you can't even put words to it. But the body isn't going to talk to us like in the words of language that we understand as language. And so for a lot of people, that feels like a little bit of a disconnect. What do you mean my body's talking to me, but I can't understand it? And I get that.
I don't know if you know this, but you just defined intuition in one of the best ways I've ever heard it like explained.
Yeah, because right, there's intuition that rises up from our system. There's intuition that comes in from the outside. There's intuition that can be divinely like almost like laid on you. There's lots of ways to um, feel that, know it. But I think, in our culture, in our society, the brain has been so highly like overappreciated. That's how we make our success. That's how we make money. That's our brain intelligence is the driver. But we've become so attached to that. And again, I'm not saying this with any judgment. It's just an observation of my own experience of like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, my brain is working overtime. It never stops working. And if I let it stop talking for a second, this whole completely other thing is available to me that's not available when my mind is going a million miles an hour. And so I'm not saying it with judgment. I'm just saying from a felt experience, we have been in a spot where we are over identified with the thinking of the mind. And it's like a bobblehead. It's like this stick figure that walks around with this big heavy brain, and then we have like no connection to our body. We don't know where we are in space. We can't tell you what our body feels. We don't have language for the senses of the body. And we're missing just a huge part of intelligence because there's so much that rises up from there that this isn't responsible for. Our brain is not responsible for it. It's not going to give us that information. It's not its job.
Right.
So if we can connect the whole intelligence, oh, there's, yeah, just so much cool stuff there for us.
100% agreed. So how are you working with people? Like what does a thing look like with you?
Yeah. I do in-person yoga and Pilates training. So that's kind of a very narrow niche of what I do through this type of work, just because it's obviously in person and local. I do breath training because of what I just described. Our brains are so busy and so active that for a lot of us, we need to learn a way to just calm the system, activate the senses of the body. And that's a very, for most people, tangible way to start to get into that other sense. So I'll do breath training and practices and more like teaching sessions for that. Excuse me.
And
And
those
then
are
a lot,
over Zoom.
yes. And then a lot of my work is one-on-one coaching. Not because you couldn't have really cool things happen in couple dynamics or in family dynamics, but I just think it's very easy to say, well, everyone else needs to change and then everything will be fine. If just that dynamic out here were different, my whole life would be different. And that just isn't true. And so my main focus is how do we do the internal work so I get to show up in a new way, practice new ways of being, watch my mental models, put in some new mental models, all of that kind of work so that it starts with home base. Like I'm going to show up in a new way and let that influence the dynamic rather than the other way around. So that's most of the work that I do.
No, that's great and amazing.
Yeah, it's really
And
fun.
and people find you at thetotalpotential.com
Yes.
and at thetotalpotential.com and every no at the do that all the time. I add that .com when you're talking
I know
about
it's so
socials,
easy.
and you
It's
don't
like
add the .com when you're talking about. So you're at the Total Potential
yes, on all the social platforms.
on all
Yes.
the socials. Okay.
Yes.
Anything else you want to say before we end today?
I just thank you for having the chance to have a conversation. This is like my absolute favorite topic. I think, any person listening who could even for a second say, what if my known reality in my family, what if it was different? How would it be different? What would feel really good about it being different? Like just open the curiosity about is what's present for you currently, is it working? Does it feel good? Does it feel like people are thriving? Or could we set all judgment aside and have a whole bunch of curiosity and just wonder, like, what else is available? That would be, yeah. My truest belief is that, like, families who are integrated and loving, like, that would change the world. If that's what family meant, was present for everybody, the whole world would be different from that. And so if any one family who's ready to kind of dive in and look at it through a new lens is there and ready, yeah, just the invitation is there.
That's amazing and wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.